Three women walked through a front door on a summer night in 1992, and the world simply swallowed them whole. No screams, no signs of struggle, no forced entry, just silence, the kind that settles over a mystery so complete, so impossibly clean, that 30 years later, we're still trying to understand how three human beings can vanish from a locked house without leaving behind a single answer. I'm Julian Cross, and tonight we're opening a file that has haunted investigators, obsessed amateur detectives, and broken the hearts of an entire community. This is the story of Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, three women who disappeared from Springfield, Missouri in the early hours of June 7, 1992. No bodies, no witnesses, no resolution, just three empty beds, three abandoned lives, and 1,000 questions that refuse to die. Welcome to the Midnight File. Let's begin where every impossible story begins, with ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that they're about to step into something that will define them forever, not by who they were, but by how they disappeared. Springfield, Missouri, June 1992. Summer had arrived with all its humid promise. Graduation parties, plans for the future, that particular kind of freedom that comes when you're young enough to believe the world is yours for the taking. For two high school seniors, Suzie Streeter and Stacy McCall, graduation night was supposed to be the beginning of everything. Instead, it became the end of everything anyone knew for certain. Suzie Streeter was 19 years old, blonde, bright-eyed, with that effortless Midwestern charm that made her popular without trying. She'd just graduated from Kickapoo High School, and like so many teenagers on the cusp of adulthood, she was filled with dreams that felt both enormous and attainable. She lived with her mother, Sherrill Levitt, in a modest single-story house at 1717 East Delmar Street, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood where people knew their neighbors and left their doors unlocked. Sherrill Levitt was 47, divorced, independent, a hairstylist who'd built a small but loyal clientele through years of hard work and genuine care for the people who sat in her chair. She was petite, soft-spoken, elegant in a way that didn't demand attention but earned respect. Those who knew her described a woman who'd weathered life's difficulties with grace, a woman who'd rebuilt herself after her marriage ended, who'd devoted herself to her daughter, who'd created a peaceful life in that little house on Delmar Street. By all accounts, Sherrill was looking forward to Suzie's graduation. She'd been planning a trip with her daughter, just the two of them, celebrating this milestone, mother and daughter stepping into a new chapter together. But that trip would never happen. Neither would any of the other ordinary, beautiful moments they'd imagined. And then there was Stacy McCall, 18 years old, Suzie's best friend since childhood. If Suzie was outgoing and social, Stacy was thoughtful and kind, the sort of person who listened more than she spoke, who earned trust through consistency rather than charisma. She had a steady boyfriend, a close-knit family, and plans to attend college in the fall. Her parents, Stu and Janice McCall, were protective, but not overbearing. They'd raised their daughter to be responsible, and she was. Stacy always called. She always came home, until the night she didn't. June 6, 1992, graduation night. The air was thick with that particular electricity of milestone moments, the gymnasium filled with proud parents, cameras flashing, names being called, futures being declared into existence. Suzie Streeter and Stacy McCall walked across that stage in their caps and gowns, diplomas in hand. The whole world supposedly ahead of them. After the ceremony, the night unfolded in the way these nights do. Parties, laughter, the kind of freedom that feels infinite when you're 18 and 19, and the summer stretches out like an open road. The plan had been carefully made. Suzie and Stacy, along with another friend, were going to attend a party, then spend the night at another friend's house in nearby Kirbyville. They'd all wake up together the next morning, head to Whitewater, a local water park, and continue the celebration. Simple, safe, the kind of plan parents approve of and teenagers follow, because it makes sense. But plans, as we know, can change in an instant, and sometimes those small changes, those tiny pivots that seem meaningless at the time, become the difference between coming home and disappearing forever. The girls went to the first party. Nothing unusual happened, just teenagers celebrating, music playing, the kind of noise that signals youth and possibility. But somewhere around midnight, They decided to leave. The house in Kirbyville where they'd planned to stay was already packed with other graduates, sleeping bags covering every inch of floor space. The idea of squeezing in suddenly felt less appealing. Suzie had a better idea. "Why don't we just go back to my house? We'll have more space. Mom won't mind." Stacy agreed. It was a reasonable change of plans. They'd be more comfortable. They'd have their own space, and Sherrill's house was only a short drive away. They'd still go to Whitewater in the morning. Nothing had really changed except the address where they'd sleep. Except everything had changed. They just didn't know it yet. Sometime after 2:00 a.m., probably closer to 2:15 or 2:30, Suzie Streeter and Stacy McCall arrived at 17-17 East Delmar Street. The house was quiet. Sherrill had gone to bed hours earlier. She'd been painting her bedroom during the day, making small improvements to her home, and she'd retired early, tired from the physical work and the excitement of her daughter's graduation. The two girls entered through the front door. They were quiet, the kind of considerate quiet you practice when you come home late and don't want to wake your mother. They carried their things inside. They prepared for bed. And then, at some point in those dark, silent hours before dawn, something happened. Something that left no trace, no evidence, no explanation. When the morning came, none of them would see it. If stories like this unsettle you, if you find yourself drawn to the mysteries that refuse to be solved, subscribe to this channel. Because the deeper we go into this case, the stranger it becomes. And trust me, we're only at the beginning. June 7th, 1992, Sunday morning. The kind of morning that should have been filled with the excited chaos of young women getting ready for a day at the water park. Instead, it began with confusion, then concern, then a creeping realization that something was terribly, impossibly wrong. Janelle Kirby was one of the friends who'd expected Suzie and Stacy to stay at her house the night before. When they didn't show up, she assumed the plan had simply changed. Teenagers do that. They're fluid, spontaneous, not always the best at communication, so Janelle wasn't worried. Not yet. Around mid-morning, Janelle and another friend, Mike Henson, decided to drive over to Suzie's house on Delmar Street to see if the girls were ready to go to Whitewater. It was a casual visit, the kind you make when you're picking up friends for a day of fun. They pulled up to the house around 8 or 9:00 in the morning. The first thing they noticed was the cars. Both Sherrill's and Suzie's vehicles were parked outside, exactly where they should be. That was a good sign, wasn't it? It meant everyone was home. They were probably just sleeping in, taking their time getting ready. Janelle knocked on the front door. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. The house sat there in the morning sunlight, silent and still. She tried the door handle. Unlocked. The door swung open easily. "Suzie, Stacy." Nothing. They stepped inside, calling out names, expecting at any moment for sleepy faces to appear, for someone to explain why they hadn't answered the door. But the house remained silent. The kind of silent that feels wrong, that prickles at the back of your neck. And then they noticed details. Small things at first, but details that didn't fit together, that created a puzzle without a picture. The television was on, playing to an empty room. The women's purses were lined up neatly inside the house, all three of them. Sherrill's, Suzie's, Stacy's. Their wallets, IDs, money, everything still inside. You don't leave your purse behind when you go somewhere. You don't leave your ID, your cash, your whole identity sitting on a table. The beds had been slept in. Sherrill's room showed signs that she'd gone to bed the night before. The girls' sleeping arrangements suggested they'd at least prepared for sleep. Perhaps had even drifted off for a few hours. But the house was empty, completely, utterly empty. Janelle felt the first real wave of confusion. Where were they? Why were the cars still here? Why were their purses still here? People don't just leave their homes without those things. Not three people at once, not without explanation. She called the McCall residence. Maybe Stacy had gone home early. Maybe there was a simple explanation. But when Janice McCall answered, her voice carried its own thread of worry. She hadn't heard from Stacy. Her daughter hadn't come home. She'd assumed Stacy was with Suzie, that the girls were together, safe. The worry in both their voices grew sharper. Janelle and her friend did something that would later become controversial. something that investigators would wish had never happened. They began tidying up, not with any malicious intent, not trying to hide anything, but with the kind of instinctive helpfulness of young people who thought they were being considerate. They cleaned up some dishes, straightened a few things, touched surfaces and objects that might have held crucial evidence. They didn't know they were standing in a crime scene. How could they? There was no crime visible, no blood, no signs of struggle, no broken windows or forced locks. Just an inexplicably empty house that should have contained 3 women. More friends began arriving throughout the morning. The confusion multiplied. Phone calls were made. Theories were proposed. Maybe they went for a walk. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe they stepped out to get breakfast. But every theory fell apart under scrutiny. Why would all 3 leave without their purses, without their cars, without telling anyone? By early afternoon, the McCall family had arrived at the house. Stu and Janice McCall walked through those rooms with growing dread, touching their daughter's belongings, calling her name, searching for any explanation that made sense. They found Stacy's jewelry on the bedside table, including her class ring, something she treasured, something she wore constantly. She wouldn't have left it behind, not willingly. That's when they called the police. That's when this story officially became the Springfield 3 case. That's when 3 missing women became a mystery that would consume a city, frustrate investigators, and remain unsolved for over 30 years. The Springfield Police Department responded to what they initially categorized as a missing persons report. 3 adult women missing for several hours, no signs of foul play. People go missing for innocent reasons all the time. Family emergencies, spontaneous trips, miscommunications. The officers who first arrived at 1717 East Delmar Street were probably expecting to find a mundane explanation. What they found instead was a perfect anomaly, a mystery so clean, so devoid of obvious clues, that it seemed almost designed to be unsolvable. Let's walk through what investigators discovered in those first crucial hours, because understanding what was there and what wasn't is key to understanding why this case remains open decades later. The house itself showed no signs of forced entry. Every door, every window, completely intact. No broken glass, no damaged locks, no indication that anyone had broken in during the night. This is crucial. It suggests that either the women left willingly, or whoever entered the house had a key, or they were let in by someone who trusted them. Inside, everything appeared relatively normal. The beds showed signs of having been slept in. Sherrill's bedroom was as she'd left it, paint supplies from her renovation project still neatly arranged. The girls' belongings were present, their overnight bags, their clothes, their personal items. 3 purses sitting together, contents undisturbed. 3 sets of car keys, money, identification. Everything you'd need to leave a house and go somewhere. But they hadn't taken any of it. The phone records revealed something interesting. There had been several calls to the house that morning, hang-ups. Someone calling and not speaking, just silence on the line, then disconnection. Were these attempts to see if anyone was home? Were they connected to the disappearances, or were they coincidental, meaningless in the larger picture? Here's where the case gets even stranger. The only piece of physical evidence that seemed potentially significant was also the most fragile. The globe covering the front porch light had been shattered. Glass fragments lay on the porch. But when had it broken? How had it broken? Was it broken during a struggle, or had it been an accident days earlier, something Sherrill had been meaning to clean up? The friends who'd arrived that morning had walked across that porch multiple times, possibly disturbing the glass, making it impossible to determine whether the pattern of fragments meant anything. And there was one more detail, subtle but chilling. One of the women's cigarettes had been broken in half. Sherrill smoked, though not heavily, and the broken cigarette was found among her things. Some investigators theorized this could indicate stress, a moment of fear or anxiety. But it could also mean nothing. Cigarettes break. People snap them without thinking. This is the fundamental frustration of the Springfield 3 case. For every potential clue, there's an equally plausible innocent explanation. For every theory, there's a counter-theory. The evidence doesn't point in any clear direction because there's almost no evidence at all. The investigation expanded rapidly. Springfield police, with assistance from the FBI, began the methodical work of interviewing friends, family, acquaintances, anyone who might have seen or heard something relevant. They constructed timelines, tracked the women's movements in the days leading up to their disappearance, searched for enemies, for threats, for any person who might have wanted to harm them. They found nothing substantial. No enemies, no threats, no obvious suspects. Sherrill had an ex-husband, but he had an alibi and no apparent motive. She'd dated occasionally, but nothing serious, nothing that had ended badly enough to inspire violence. Her life was quiet, stable, focused on her work and her daughter. Suzie and Stacy were teenagers, popular, well-liked, no known conflicts serious enough to result in something like this. They weren't involved in anything dangerous. They hadn't made enemies. They were, by all accounts, exactly what they appeared to be, ordinary young women celebrating a milestone, living normal lives. The neighborhood canvas revealed little. This was a residential area where people generally knew each other, where unusual activity would likely be noticed. But no one reported seeing anything suspicious in the early morning hours of June 7th. No screams, no sounds of struggle, no unfamiliar vehicles lingering on the street. It was as if 3 women had been erased from existence with surgical precision, leaving behind their belongings, their vehicles, their whole lives, but taking nothing that could tell investigators what happened or where they'd gone. If this case has you gripping your seat, if you find yourself needing to know more, hit that like button. Let me know you're here with me, digging through these files, trying to make sense of the inexplicable. And believe me, we're about to go even deeper into the theories that have obsessed investigators and armchair detectives for 3 decades. As the days turned into weeks, then months, then years, the investigation into the Springfield 3 transformed from an active missing persons case into something else. A cold case, yes, but more than that. It became an obsession for many, a puzzle that seemed designed to resist solution. Let's examine the primary theories that have emerged over the decades, because in the absence of solid evidence, what we have instead is speculation, possibility, and the maddening sense that the answer is somehow both obvious and completely hidden. Theory 1, the opportunistic intruder. This is perhaps the simplest explanation, and in many ways, the most terrifying. A stranger or strangers with criminal intent happened to notice the house in the early morning hours. Maybe they saw the graduation decorations, realized there might be valuables inside. Maybe they knocked on the door with some pretext, car trouble, needing to use a phone, some story designed to gain entry. Sherrill, being kind and trusting, opened the door. Once inside, the intruder realized there were 3 women in the house, alone and vulnerable. Rather than simply robbing them and leaving, something escalated. The situation spiraled out of control. The intruder panicked, made a decision, and somehow managed to remove all 3 women from the house without leaving obvious evidence. The problems with this theory are numerous. How does one person, or even 2 people, control 3 women without causing a disturbance loud enough for neighbors to hear? The houses on Delmar Street weren't isolated mansions. They were suburban homes with neighbors on both sides. A struggle involving 3 adult women should have generated noise. Screaming, furniture being knocked over, something, yet no one heard anything unusual that night. And then there's the logistics. How do you remove 3 people from a house, transport them somewhere, dispose of them, or hide them so effectively that no trace has ever been found? All while leaving the scene pristine enough that investigators couldn't immediately determine what happened. It's not impossible, but it requires a level of control and efficiency that suggests either extreme luck or careful planning. And if it was planned, that contradicts the opportunistic nature of the theory. Theory 2, someone they knew. This theory suggests that the women were targeted specifically by someone who knew them, who knew the house, who knew their routines. Perhaps someone from Sherrill's past, an old boyfriend, a disgruntled client, someone who'd been fixating on her and saw an opportunity when Suzie and her friend arrived home. Or perhaps someone from the girls' social circle, someone whose interest in them was darker than friendship, who saw graduation night as a chance to act on obsessive impulses. The advantage of this theory is that it explains the lack of forced entry. If the women knew their attacker, they might have opened the door willingly. They might have let him inside without fear, at least initially. The trust would have provided those first crucial moments of control. Investigators did look into this angle extensively. They interviewed ex-boyfriends, acquaintances, men who'd shown interest in any of the three women. They ran background checks, verified alibis, searched for anyone with a history of violence or obsessive behavior. They found persons of interest, certainly, people whose stories didn't quite add up, whose behavior seemed suspicious. But suspicious isn't the same as guilty. Without physical evidence, without witnesses, without any actual proof, suspicion remains just that. One name that has circulated in amateur investigations over the years is that of a man who was reportedly seen near the area that night, who had a criminal history, who allegedly made comments about the case that seemed to demonstrate inside knowledge. But despite extensive scrutiny, law enforcement has never been able to definitively connect this individual or any other specific person to the disappearances. The evidence simply isn't there. Theory 3. The serial perpetrator connection. In 1992, the landscape of criminal investigation was different from today. DNA analysis was in its infancy. Digital surveillance was minimal. The internet as we know it barely existed. If someone was engaging in a pattern of violent crime across multiple jurisdictions, connecting those crimes was much more difficult than it is now. Some investigators have wondered whether the Springfield 3 disappearances might be connected to other cases, whether a serial offender might have been operating in the Midwest during this period. There were, in fact, other unsolved disappearances and cases in Missouri and surrounding states during the late 1980s and early 1990s. Could they be related? Could the same person or persons be responsible for multiple crimes? It's an intriguing possibility, but again, without evidence linking the cases, it remains speculation. Serial offenders typically follow patterns, leave signatures, have methods that become recognizable across crimes. The Springfield 3 case is so clean, so devoid of obvious evidence, that it's hard to establish any clear pattern or signature to compare with other cases. Theory 4. The parking garage. Here's where the case takes a turn into the realm of local legend and investigative frustration. In the early months after the disappearances, police received tips and theories from psychics, amateur investigators, and concerned citizens. One theory that gained particular traction involved the Cox South Hospital parking garage, which was under construction in June 1992. The theory suggested that the women's bodies might have been buried in the concrete foundation of the garage, disposed of during the construction process when fresh concrete was being poured regularly. The timing aligned. The garage was being built when the women disappeared. The location was in Springfield, accessible, a place where bodies could theoretically be hidden permanently beneath tons of concrete and multiple levels of parking structure. This theory gained enough credibility that it's been seriously discussed by investigators and even featured in media coverage of the case. In 2007, a team attempted to use ground-penetrating radar to scan beneath the garage floor, looking for anomalies that might indicate remains. The scan did show some unusual readings in one area, suggesting something beneath the concrete that didn't match the surrounding substrate. But here's the devastating part. Despite these findings, despite years of public pressure and advocacy from families and case followers, no excavation has ever been approved. The hospital administration has declined to allow investigators to break through the garage floor, citing concerns about structural integrity, cost, and liability. So the theory remains just that, a theory, unproven and unprovable, without permission to dig. Imagine being the McCall family, being told that your daughter might be beneath that concrete and having no power to compel anyone to look. Imagine the torture of that possibility existing, year after year, while bureaucracy and practical concerns prevent any resolution. Theory 5. They left willingly. This is the theory no one wants to believe, but it must be mentioned. Could all three women have voluntarily left their home in the early morning hours, for reasons unknown? Could they have gone somewhere willingly with someone they trusted, only to meet with foul play later, far from their home? The evidence against this theory is substantial. 3 purses left behind, 3 sets of car keys, money and identification abandoned. Stacy's jewelry, including her beloved class ring, left on the bedside table. These aren't things you forget when you leave your house, even in a hurry. And for all three women to leave without these essentials simultaneously strains credibility beyond its breaking point. But the theory persists in some circles, usually proposed by those seeking any explanation that doesn't involve violence, that allows for some possibility of survival, however remote. The truth is, none of these theories fully satisfy. Each one has elements that make sense, and elements that fall apart under scrutiny. And that's precisely what makes the Springfield 3 case so maddening and so enduring. We're not missing just one piece of the puzzle. We're missing most of the pieces. We're trying to see a picture that might not even exist in the evidence available to us. Leave a comment below and tell me which theory makes the most sense to you. Or if you have a theory I haven't mentioned, share it. Because cases like this survive on collective investigation, on people refusing to let them fade into forgotten files. Your insight might be the perspective someone needs to see something in a new way. Let's turn our attention to the human cost of this mystery. Because behind every cold case, behind every unsolved disappearance, there are people whose lives were fundamentally altered, who've spent decades in a state of suspended grief, unable to mourn completely because there's been no closure, no final answer. Stu and Janice McCall, Stacy's parents. Imagine receiving that phone call on what should have been a day of celebration, your daughter's first morning after high school graduation. Imagine the initial confusion turning to worry, worry turning to fear, fear crystallizing into the nightmare that has defined the rest of your life. The McCalls became advocates, investigators in their own right. They've worked tirelessly with law enforcement, granted interviews, maintained public awareness of the case. They've aged decades in the glare of this tragedy, watching other families get closure while they remain in limbo. Janice McCall has spoken publicly about the special torture of not knowing. Is her daughter alive or deceased? Should she hope or grieve? How do you move forward when you're frozen in the moment of loss? Stacy would be in her 50s now if she's alive. She'd potentially have a family, a career, an entire lifetime of experiences. Or she's been gone since that June morning in 1992. Her life ended at 18, cut short before it truly began. Her parents don't know which reality they're living in, and that uncertainty is its own particular form of suffering. Suzie Streeter's father has also spoken about the case over the years. Divorced from Sherrill and living elsewhere when the disappearances occurred, he's carried the weight of losing both his daughter and his ex-wife simultaneously, in a way that provided no comfort, no understanding, no peace. He's described the agony of anniversaries, of birthdays that go uncelebrated, of graduation memories that are now forever tainted by what came after. And what about the friends, the young people who were there that graduation night, who made innocent decisions that in retrospect feel heavy with consequence? Janelle Kirby, who found the empty house. Mike Henson, who was with her. The friends who were at the parties, who last saw Suzie and Stacy alive and laughing. They've had to live with questions too. Could we have done something differently? If we'd convinced them to come to Kirbyville as planned, would they be alive? If we hadn't cleaned the house that morning, would investigators have found crucial evidence? These are questions without answers, guilts without foundation, but they persist anyway. Because that's what tragedy does. It radiates outward, touching everyone in its orbit, leaving nothing unchanged. The Springfield community itself was transformed by this case. For years afterward, people in that Missouri city lived with a heightened sense of vulnerability. If three women could vanish from a locked house in a good neighborhood without anyone hearing or seeing anything, then safety was an illusion. The case became part of the city's identity. Springfield, Missouri, home of the Springfield 3, the place where the impossible happened and was never explained. Every few years, something reignites public interest. A new lead that seems promising but ultimately goes nowhere. A television documentary that brings the case to a national audience. A true crime podcast that introduces a new generation to the mystery. Online communities dedicated to solving the case analyze every detail, propose new theories, find connections that investigators might have missed. Some of this amateur work has been genuinely helpful, generating tips and perspectives that law enforcement has followed up on. Some of it has been less productive, descending into wild speculation and conspiracy theories that do more harm than good. But the attention never fully fades. Because the Springfield 3 case has everything that makes a mystery endure, ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, an inexplicable crime, competent investigators stymied by lack of evidence and no resolution. It's a story that refuses to end because it has no ending. And somewhere the truth exists. Someone knows what happened in those early morning hours of June 7th, 1992. Maybe it's the person or persons who took those 3 women. Maybe it's someone who heard something, saw something, knew something, but never came forward out of fear or uncertainty. Maybe it's buried in evidence that investigators have reviewed 100 times but haven't seen from the right angle. Maybe it's literally buried beneath concrete in a hospital parking garage, waiting for permission to be excavated. The truth is, out there, it always is. The question is whether it will ever be found. If this story has affected you, if you believe cases like this deserve attention and investigation, no matter how much time has passed, share this video with someone who appreciates true mysteries. Spread the awareness. Keep these names alive. Because the moment we stop talking about Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter and Stacy McCall is the moment their case truly goes cold forever. As we move into the modern era of this investigation, it's worth noting how technology has changed both the possibilities and the frustrations of cold case work. DNA analysis that was crude or non-existent in 1992 is now sophisticated enough to identify individuals from microscopic samples. Digital forensics can recover information from devices and communications that investigators in the early 90s couldn't have imagined. Genealogical databases have solved multiple cold cases in recent years, identifying perpetrators through familial DNA connections decades after their crimes. But all of these technological advances require one crucial element: evidence. Physical evidence that can be analyzed, samples that can be tested, data that can be recovered. And the fundamental problem with the Springfield 3 case is that there's so little evidence to work with. The crime scene was compromised before investigators even knew it was a crime scene. The house was cleaned, surfaces were touched, potential DNA evidence was contaminated or destroyed. The women themselves are gone, which means there are no bodies to examine, no crime scenes beyond the house itself to process. It's the perfect storm of investigative frustration, a case that desperately needs modern forensic technology applied to evidence that largely doesn't exist. That said, the Springfield Police Department has not given up. The case remains open. A dedicated cold case unit periodically reviews the files, follows up on new tips, applies new technologies to whatever evidence they do have. They've conducted multiple searches over the years based on various tips and theories: rural properties, abandoned wells, areas of wilderness where bodies might have been disposed of. None of these searches have yielded results. In recent years, there have been renewed pushes to use advanced ground-penetrating technology at the Cox South Hospital parking garage to definitively determine whether human remains are present beneath the concrete. These efforts have been led by family members, case advocates, and even some current and former law enforcement officials who believe the garage theory has enough credibility to warrant investigation. But as of this recording, the necessary permissions and funding have not materialized. The garage stands, and whatever might or might not be beneath it remains undisturbed. There's also been speculation about whether witness protection might be involved, whether one or more of the women were taken into protective custody related to some criminal investigation, their disappearances staged to protect them from a threat. It's a theory that offers hope of survival, but it's also nearly impossible to verify and seems unlikely given the circumstances. Witness protection programs don't typically involve faking the disappearance of 3 people simultaneously, leaving families in agonizing uncertainty for decades. The more conventional theory, that the women met with foul play, that their bodies were hidden or disposed of so effectively that they've never been discovered, remains the most likely explanation. But even accepting that theory doesn't answer the crucial questions: who, why, how, and most importantly, where are they? 3 women, vanished in the night, leaving behind everything except themselves. As we approach the conclusion of this investigation, I want to take a moment to reflect on what this case represents beyond its specific details. Because the Springfield 3 isn't just about 3 missing women from Missouri in 1992. It's about the limits of justice, the persistence of mystery, and the ways that unanswered questions can haunt not just individuals, but entire communities for generations. It's about how quickly safety can become vulnerability, how the familiar can transform into the threatening, how an ordinary night can become a dividing line between before and after. Every year on June 7th, people gather in Springfield to remember Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy. Vigils are held. Candles are lit. Their names are spoken aloud by people who never knew them but refuse to forget them. Because that's what we do with unsolved mysteries. We hold space for them. We keep them alive in our collective memory. We insist that even without resolution, they matter. The McCall family continues to hope, despite everything, that one day they'll receive the phone call every family of missing persons dreams of and dreads, the call that provides an answer, even if it's not the answer they want. Closure, as terrible as it might be, would be better than this eternal not knowing. Investigators continue to work the case when new leads emerge, continue to hold out hope that forensic science will advance to the point where evidence they currently have becomes evidence they can use. They maintain tip lines, they follow up on reports, they haven't given up, even when the case seems unsolvable. And the general public, people like you watching this video right now, continue to be fascinated by the case, to discuss it, to propose theories, to keep it in the cultural consciousness. That attention matters. It means that if someone out there knows something, they're constantly reminded that this case hasn't been forgotten, that coming forward is still possible, that truth still matters even decades later. But I also want to acknowledge the pain that sustained attention can cause families. Every documentary, every podcast, every YouTube video about the Springfield 3 is potentially another reminder of the worst moment of these families' lives. It's a complicated balance, keeping cases alive in public memory while being sensitive to the private grief of those most affected. I hope, in presenting this case tonight, I've struck that balance. I hope I've honored the memories of Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall by telling their story with the respect and attention it deserves. They were real people, with real lives, with dreams and personalities and futures that should have unfolded. They weren't just victims of an unsolved crime. They were a mother and daughter who loved each other, who were planning a trip together. They were best friends who'd known each other since childhood, who'd just graduated, who were standing on the threshold of adulthood. And then someone, for reasons we still don't understand, took all of that away. Before we close this file, I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine it's 2:30 a.m. on June 7th, 1992. You're in a modest house on Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri. 2 teenage girls have just come home from graduation night celebrations, trying to be quiet so as not to wake the girl's mother. They're tired, happy, filled with that specific fatigue that comes from milestone moments. They're probably whispering to each other, maybe laughing quietly about something from the party, planning their day at the water park tomorrow. The mother is asleep down the hall, her room smelling of fresh paint from her home improvement project. She's probably dreaming peaceful dreams, content that her daughter is home safe, proud of the young woman Suzie has become. It's a snapshot of American normalcy, suburban safety, that kind of scene that plays out in thousands of homes every night across the country. And then something happens. A knock at the door, perhaps. A phone call. Someone who shouldn't be there suddenly is. A moment of confusion, then fear, then what? What could happen in those next minutes or hours that would result in 3 women disappearing so completely, so cleanly? That decades of investigation can't explain it. That's the question that haunts this case. That's the gap in our understanding that all the investigation, all the theories, all the speculation can't bridge. We can reconstruct the before, we can document the after. But that crucial moment when before became after, when 3 women were there and then weren't, that moment remains hidden from us, locked away behind a wall of silence and absence. And maybe that's the most unsettling realization of all. Not that bad things can happen. We know that intellectually, we accept it as a fact of existence. But that they can happen so completely, so thoroughly, leaving so little trace that even our best efforts at understanding come up empty. It challenges our belief in cause and effect, in evidence and explanation. in the very notion that reality leaves marks we can read and interpret. The Springfield 3 disappeared. That's the only fact we have with absolute certainty. Everything else, every theory, every speculation, every investigation, is our attempt to fill in the blank space where an explanation should be. And so far, after more than 3 decades, that space remains blank. Some mysteries are solved with a breakthrough, a new witness comes forward, a piece of evidence is reanalyzed with better technology, someone's conscience finally breaks, and they confess. Some mysteries are solved through persistence, investigators slowly accumulating small pieces of information until they coalesce into understanding. And some mysteries remain mysteries despite everyone's best efforts. They become part of the landscape, permanent question marks in our collective story. The Springfield 3 case has, so far, been the third kind. But every unsolved case is unsolved only until the moment it isn't. Every cold case is one piece of information away from becoming a solved case. Every mystery has the potential to be unraveled, given the right combination of evidence, insight, and perhaps luck, which means hope, however faint, however statistically unlikely, remains justified. Hope that someone will come forward with information they've kept hidden for 30 years. Hope the technology will advance enough to extract meaning from evidence that currently reveals nothing. Hope that the parking garage will be excavated and provide either answers or eliminate one more theory. Hope that somewhere, somehow, the truth will emerge from the shadows where it's been hiding. And if you've stayed with me this far, if you've listened to this entire investigation, then you're part of that hope. Because cases like this survive on attention. They persist in public consciousness through people like you who watch videos, read articles, discuss theories, refuse to let the story die. Every view, every share, every conversation about the Springfield 3 is a small act of resistance against forgetting. The families of these 3 women know that the public hasn't forgotten. They know that people around the world are still asking questions, still caring about what happened, still hoping for answers. That knowledge, I imagine, must be both comforting and painful. Comforting because their loved ones haven't faded into obscurity, painful because the sustained attention is a reminder that the nightmare hasn't ended. But it's also necessary, because the alternative is worse. The alternative is silence, is forgetting, is allowing 3 women to disappear not just physically, but from memory as well. And we can't let that happen. We won't let that happen. I want to return, for a moment, to the individuals at the center of this story, because sometimes in discussing evidence and theories and investigations, we lose sight of the human beings whose lives were stolen. Sherrill Levitt was 47 years old. She'd lived long enough to experience both joy and hardship, to build and rebuild her life, to develop the wisdom that comes from surviving difficult times. She was, by all accounts, a gentle soul, kind to her clients, devoted to her daughter, someone who'd created a peaceful existence through hard work and determination. She deserved to enjoy her daughter's graduation, to take that planned trip together, to watch Suzie navigate adulthood, to eventually become a grandmother, perhaps, to grow old surrounded by the life she'd carefully constructed. She deserved more than to vanish in the night from her own home. Suzie Streeter was 19. Barely past childhood, really, though she probably would have bristled at that characterization. She was in that beautiful, terrible space between being someone's child and becoming your own person. She had dreams we'll never know the full scope of, ambitions that will never be realized, relationships that will never develop. She should have had decades ahead of her, decades of love and heartbreak and success and failure, and all the messy, gorgeous complexity of a human life. She deserved the future that was taken from her. Stacy McCall was 18, the youngest of the 3. She'd literally just graduated high school hours before she disappeared. Her entire adult life should have been ahead of her. College, career, family, adventures, mistakes, triumphs, ordinary Tuesday afternoons, extraordinary moments of joy. She should have had the chance to figure out who she was beyond her parents' home, beyond her high school identity. She should have grown old and looked back on graduation night as a distant, happy memory, not the last night of her life. She deserved time. Time to become whoever she was meant to be. These aren't just names in a case file. They're not just statistics in the grim catalogue of unsolved disappearances. They were people, real, complex, valuable people whose lives had meaning beyond their final mysterious moments. And whoever took them, whoever erased them from existence that June morning, also erased all the people they might have become, all the relationships they might have formed, all the moments they should have experienced. That's the true scope of the crime here. Not just 3 lives ended, but 3 futures stolen, and countless other lives forever altered by their absence. If you're still with me, if this story has moved you or troubled you or made you think, please subscribe to this channel. The Midnight File exists because stories like this matter, because mysteries deserve attention, because the disappeared deserve to be remembered. There are more cases in the file cabinet, more stories that need to be told, more mysteries that refuse to rest. And I'll be here opening those files, sharing those stories as long as you're here listening. Now, I want to address something that often gets overlooked in discussions of cold cases, the ripple effects on the broader community and criminal justice system. The Springfield 3 case has had lasting impacts on how missing persons cases are handled, particularly in Missouri. The initial hours and days of the investigation revealed weaknesses in protocol, the crime scene contamination, the delay in securing the house, the difficulty in coordinating between different jurisdictions and agencies. These weren't failures of individual officers, but systemic issues that many police departments faced in the early 90s. Since then, missing persons protocols have improved significantly. Faster response times, better crime scene preservation, more immediate coordination between agencies. The Springfield 3 case is sometimes cited in law enforcement training as an example of why quick, careful action is crucial in the early hours of a disappearance. It's a bitter legacy, lessons learned through failure, but perhaps something positive has emerged from the tragedy. The case has also contributed to public awareness about the reality of missing persons cases. Before cases like this received widespread attention, there was a tendency to assume that adults who went missing had done so voluntarily, that they'd turn up eventually, that immediate action wasn't necessary. The Springfield 3 helped shift that perception. Now we understand that disappearances can be sinister from the start, that waiting to investigate can mean losing crucial evidence, that every hour matters. There's also been a cultural shift in how we think about safety. The Springfield 3 disappeared from what should have been a safe space, a locked home in a good neighborhood. This challenged the comforting narrative that if you just take the right precautions, you'll be safe. Sometimes precautions aren't enough. Sometimes danger finds you anyway. It's an uncomfortable truth, but acknowledging it has led to more honest conversations about vulnerability and risk. The case has also become a touchstone in the true crime community, a case that amateur investigators return to repeatedly, convinced that fresh eyes and new approaches might succeed, where decades of professional investigation have struggled. Online forums dedicated to the case contain thousands of posts analyzing every detail, proposing theories, finding potential connections to other cases. Some of this work has been genuinely valuable, generating tips that law enforcement has followed up on. Some has been less helpful, descending into speculation and unfounded accusations, but the engagement itself speaks to something important. A collective refusal to accept that some questions simply can't be answered. We want to believe that every mystery has a solution, that every puzzle has pieces that fit together if we just look at them the right way. The Springfield 3 case tests that belief. It asks us to confront the possibility that sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, the truth remains hidden, and yet we keep trying. That persistence, that refusal to give up, is itself a kind of tribute to Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy. It says their disappearances matter enough that people decades later are still trying to understand what happened. It says their lives were valuable enough that strangers refused to forget them. Let me take you through one more aspect of this case that often goes undiscussed: the psychological toll on investigators. The detectives who worked this case in 1992, who interviewed witnesses, processed the scene, followed leads that went nowhere. Many of them have retired now. Some have passed away. But those who worked the Springfield 3 case describe it as one that stayed with them, one they couldn't let go of even after they'd moved on to other investigations. There's a particular frustration that comes from having all the pieces of a case, except the most important ones. The witnesses who saw the women the night before, The physical scene, the timelines, the background information, everything is there except the crucial connecting thread that would make sense of it all. It's like trying to read a book with the key chapters torn out. You have context, but not meaning. Some investigators developed their own theories over the years, suspicions they couldn't prove but couldn't shake either. Some have gone to their graves still thinking about the case, still wondering if there was something they missed, some question they should have asked, some lead they should have pursued more aggressively. That kind of unresolved professional responsibility takes a toll. These are people who dedicated their careers to solving cases, to bringing closure to families, to finding truth. And the Springfield 3 case denied them that satisfaction. There are also investigators who came to the case later, assigned to the cold case unit years or decades after the original investigation. They inherit not just the case file, but also the weight of all those who worked it before them. They're aware that highly competent detectives have already pursued every obvious avenue. They're looking for what everyone else missed, for the needle in a haystack that previous searchers somehow overlooked. It's daunting work made more difficult by the fact that with each passing year, memories fade, witnesses die, evidence degrades. But they keep working. Because that's what you do when families are still waiting for answers. That's what you do when justice demands it, even when justice seems impossibly distant. The Springfield Police Department maintains that the case is solvable. They believe that someone somewhere has information that could break it open. They maintain tip lines. They follow up on every credible lead, no matter how many years have passed. They're committed to these 3 women and their families, even when the odds seem overwhelming. And maybe that's the lesson here, if there is one. Maybe the point isn't whether the case gets solved tomorrow or next year or ever. Maybe the point is the commitment to trying, the refusal to give up, the insistence that these lives mattered enough to keep searching for truth. Because giving up would mean accepting that 3 women can simply cease to exist without explanation. It would mean telling their families that their loved ones don't matter enough to keep investigating. It would mean allowing whoever took them to escape consequences entirely, and none of those outcomes are acceptable. So the work continues. The case file remains open. The investigation, though cold, is not dead, and somewhere the truth waits to be discovered. Comment below if you have any information about this case, any theories you think deserve more attention, or any questions I didn't address. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep these names alive. Let's make sure that Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall are not forgotten. As we draw near the end of this investigation, I want to spend a moment on something that might seem tangential, but is actually central to understanding the enduring power of this case: the photographs. There are pictures of Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy from before that night, graduation photos, family snapshots, ordinary images of ordinary people living their lives, captured in moments when they had no idea those photographs would become something else. Not just memories, but evidence of existence, proof that they were here, that they were real. Look at those images, if you can find them. Look at Suzie in her graduation cap and gown, young and smiling, her whole life supposedly ahead of her. Look at Stacy's class photo, that slight smile, that hint of the thoughtful personality people who knew her described. Look at Sherrill in various pictures from her life, a woman who'd survived difficulties and built something stable and peaceful for herself and her daughter. These photographs are haunting, not because of what they show, but because of what we know comes after. Every smile, every moment of happiness captured in those images is shadowed by our knowledge of what's coming. It's like watching a movie when you know the ending is tragic. You want to warn them, to tell them to change their plans, to stay somewhere else that night, to do anything differently. But of course we can't. They're frozen in those moments of before, forever unaware of after. And that's the heartbreak at the center of every tragedy. The people experiencing it didn't know it was coming. They were just living their normal lives, making reasonable decisions, existing in a world that felt safe enough, until it wasn't. There's one more photograph I want you to think about, though this one doesn't exist in any case file. Imagine it. 3 empty beds in a house in Springfield, purses lined up on a table, cars parked outside, a broken porch light globe, glass scattered on concrete. All the physical things these women left behind, still there, waiting for people who will never return to claim them. That image, the absence where there should be presence, is the truest photograph of this case. It's what investigators found. It's what the families have lived with for over 30 years. Spaces that should be filled but aren't. Questions that should have answers but don't. Every cold case is, in some way, a photograph of absence. A gap where understanding should be. A silence where voices should exist. And we, the living, the ones who remain, we study those gaps and silences, trying to fill them with meaning, with explanation, with anything that might make them less unbearable. But sometimes the gaps remain, sometimes the silence persists, and we're left with the uncomfortable truth that reality doesn't always provide the resolution we crave. The Springfield 3 case might be solved tomorrow. A deathbed confession, a chance discovery, a breakthrough in forensic technology. Any of these could suddenly illuminate what has been dark for decades. Or the case might remain unsolved for another 30 years, another 50, forever. The truth might be buried too deep, hidden too well, protected by silence that will never break. We don't know which future we're heading toward. That uncertainty is itself part of the story. What we do know is this: 3 women disappeared in June of 1992. Their families have lived with that disappearance every day since. Investigators have worked the case for 3 decades. The public has refused to forget. And somewhere, in the space between what we know and what we don't, the truth exists. It's waiting. Just like the families are waiting, just like justice is waiting. And we wait with them, bearing witness to their absence, holding space for their memory, refusing to let them disappear from consciousness the way they disappeared from that house. Because that's all we can do, really. Remember them, tell their stories, keep asking questions, keep searching for answers, keep insisting that they mattered, that they matter still, that 3 lives stolen without explanation is an injustice that deserves our attention and our efforts, no matter how much time passes. Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, Stacy McCall. Say their names, remember their faces, honor their lives by refusing to forget their disappearances. That's what the Midnight File is about, bearing witness to the forgotten, the unsolved, the mysteries that society might prefer to leave in the shadows, bringing them into the light, examining them with clear eyes and open hearts, acknowledging that we may never have all the answers, but that the questions themselves matter. If you believe in that mission, if you think these stories deserve to be told, then please share this video. Introduce someone else to this case. Let these names reach further into the world. Because every person who learns about the Springfield 3, who thinks about them, who wonders what happened, that's another small victory against forgetting. That's another voice joining the chorus demanding answers. And maybe, just maybe, one of those voices will reach someone who knows something, someone who's carried a secret for 30 years and is finally ready to release it. Someone who witnessed something but never came forward. Someone who has a piece of the puzzle they didn't realize was significant. That's why we keep telling these stories. That's why we refuse to let them rest. Because the right story told to the right person at the right time might be the catalyst that finally brings truth to light. There are families waiting for that moment. Families who've aged 30 years in the shadow of this mystery. Families who mark every anniversary with grief and hope tangled together. Families who've seen their loved ones become famous in the worst way, not for what they accomplished in life, but for how mysteriously they left it. Those families deserve better. They deserve answers. They deserve justice. They deserve to know what happened in their loved ones' final moments. They deserve to lay them to rest, literally and figuratively. They deserve closure, however painful it might be. And until that day comes, if it comes, we bear witness. We remember. We keep the story alive. We refuse to let 3 women be reduced to nothing more than a mystery, a footnote, an unsolved case number in a file somewhere. They were people. They are people in memory, if not in life, and they deserve to be remembered as such, not as victims, not as mysteries, but as individuals who lived and loved and should have had so much more time. Sherrill, who worked hard to build a peaceful life and deserved to enjoy it. Suzie, who was just beginning her adult life and deserved to discover who she would become. Stacy, who'd just graduated and deserved every opportunity that should have followed. 3 women. 1 inexplicable night. Decades of questions without answers. This is the Midnight File. This is the story of the Springfield 3. And until someone comes forward with the truth, until the case is solved, until justice is finally served, this story will remain open, unfinished, waiting for its conclusion. Just like the families are waiting. Just like we all are. Some mysteries are meant to be solved. Some truths are meant to be discovered. Some stories demand their endings, no matter how long we have to wait for them. The Springfield 3 is one of those stories, and somewhere, whether in this world or the next, Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall are waiting too. Waiting to be found. Waiting to be brought home. Waiting for their story to finally reach its end. Until then, we remember, we question, we search, we refuse to give up. Because that's what we owe to them, to their families, to the very concept of justice itself. Every town keeps a secret. Springfield, Missouri has kept this one for over 30 years. But secrets, no matter how well kept, have a way of eventually seeing the light. The question isn't if the truth will emerge. The question is when. And whether, when it does, it will provide the answers we've been seeking or simply raise new questions we never thought to ask. That's the thing about mysteries like this. Even their solutions, when they come, are rarely simple. Truth is complicated. Justice is complicated. The human capacity for harm and the human capacity for hiding that harm, both are deeper and stranger than we often want to acknowledge. But complicated doesn't mean impossible. Difficult doesn't mean hopeless. And unsolved doesn't mean unsolvable. So we continue, we investigate, we discuss, we theorize, we wait, we hope, and most importantly, we remember. Because in the end, that might be the most important thing we can do. Remember that 3 women walked into a house one June night in 1992 and never walked out again. Remember that their lives had value beyond their disappearances. Remember that somewhere, people are still grieving, still hoping, still waiting for a phone call that might never come. Remember that justice delayed is not justice denied, only justice deferred. And that deferral might last years or decades, but it doesn't last forever. Somewhere the truth is waiting, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be spoken, waiting to bring 3 women home in whatever way that's still possible. And we'll be here waiting with them for however long it takes. This is Julian Cross. This is the Midnight File. And the case of the Springfield 3 remains open, unsolved but never forgotten. If stories like this haunt you the way they haunt me, if you find yourself lying awake at night thinking about the unanswered questions, the lives interrupted, the mysteries that refuse to rest, then stay with me. Subscribe, because there are more files in the cabinet, more stories that need telling, more mysteries that deserve our attention. The next one might be even darker. The next one might keep you up all night. But that's what we do here. We look into the shadows, not because we enjoy the darkness, but because we believe the light of attention, of memory, of persistent questioning, might eventually illuminate what's been hidden for too long. Until next time, remember this. Every unsolved case is someone's tragedy. Every cold file is someone's unfinished grief. Every mystery represents real people, real lives, real families still searching for answers. We owe them our attention. We owe them our memory. We owe them our refusal to forget, no matter how much time passes. Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, Stacy McCall, 3 women who deserved better than to vanish into mystery. 3 women who deserve to be remembered, to be honored, and someday to be brought home. Good night. And if you find yourself thinking about this case in the quiet hours before dawn, if you find yourself wondering, questioning, unable to let it go, then you understand why the Midnight File exists. Because some stories don't let us go. They hold on to us, demanding to be heard, demanding to be remembered, demanding that we keep searching for truth even when truth seems impossible to find. This is one of those stories, and it's not over yet.